itself. The display has to turn off within 15 minutes of inactivity. Have you ever noticed in Windows that's a default? This is part of this right here. System sleep or off within 30 minutes of inactivity, which is again the default setting in Windows. It says no small scale servers, small scale servers and rack-mounted workstations are not required to meet the power management requirements. If the server goes to sleep, it's not serving anything. High expandability computers. Now that's obviously in this. Now high expandability computers is gaming computers. That's essentially what that is. To be a high expandability computer that falls within this exempt category must meet the two following requirements. Must have a 600 watt or greater 80 plus gold power supply and, not or, and a graphics card, a discrete graphics card that is 600 gigabytes per second memory bandwidth or greater. Now that essentially equates to a 2080 Ti equivalent. You can do the math. You can go and look at all the GPUs and know what their bandwidth is. And it must have a discrete graphics card that meets that requirement. So the irony here is that they're actually trying to save power. The lower end gaming systems that do not meet these requirements because they don't have a high-end graphics card or they don't have a high capacity power supply don't meet these requirements to be exempt. Therefore, your high power usage gaming systems are exempt. So in fact, when it comes to the way the SIs are speccing all of this out, the fact that they can get certified, Dell, that screenshot everyone's kind of freaking out about, now if you go in there and try to take that computer that is not California compliant, that says that 11400F and has the 1650 Super in there, if you go in there and then add a 600 watt gold power supply and a 3080, you still can't ship it. So what that means is that Dell has actually taken that certified SKU. Remember, there's one computer there that you can send to California. And everyone's like, well, I want that one. They're the same parts. It's the same parts. Myself included just looked at that for face value and said, why should that one be sent to California? It's because Dell actually got that particular SKU and that system certified in the state of California. Of course, yes, 50-state legal computer. Things I never thought I would say again. All right, so what this means to the two different categories of viewers I have right now. If you build your own type, this doesn't affect you in any way. Unless they start trying to regulate parts individually, which I don't see how they can actually enforce or do, but they can just stop rating parts in, but we don't get there. This doesn't affect you in any way. You're more affected, obviously, by the price of parts than anything happening here. For the person that doesn't build their own computer and wants to buy one, you have a couple of options here. You hope that the company is actually speccing out their build it on the website. We put boxes that will actually be smart enough to know, like, this is California legal. When it comes to the DSI, we just have to hope they're smart enough to update their database. You know, if the criteria is met for the exemption here, that yes, they'll ship it to the state. Or you can do what a lot of people do when it comes to smart card parts. Just have a friend in Arizona, you know, bounce ship it for you. I mean, there is that. It sucks, but, you know, a lot of people do it. They're not targeting gamers specifically. They're targeting gluttons. And what I mean by gluttons is, and I'm guilty of this, I think all three of us in this room, probably thousands of watching right now, are guilty of walking away from your computer and turning it on. That is what led to all of it. If you're also like me and you like to turn off a lot of the power saving modes and sleep modes, you're definitely all wrong. But you can't necessarily fault the power utility or the public utility commission for wanting to reduce this type of waste. I hope the way we explain the exemptions, the way the expandability score works, who's actually being regulated here, who's being targeted, puts a lot of you at ease, because really at the end of the day, unless you were going to buy an SI decision, I think a lot of SIs right now are still in California if they haven't stopped. It doesn't really affect you right now. Monitors might. That's something coming in December of this year, and I'm not going to talk about monitors because you wouldn't even believe what we include to think of this level of information. Most of the people that are talking about this are just regurgitating and repeating an old 2016 LA Times story that has no information in it. And by the way, if you go to the CDC's website and you actually go through the drop-down to find this information, and you click desktop computers, it says 404 not found. So the commission that is in charge of this can't even keep their website up to date. I'm just going to end it there. Let that sink in.
Today, you want things to be on autopilot.
but they could be something like the twin prime conjecture. Twin primes are prime numbers that are separated by just one number, like 11 and 13, or 17 and 19. As you go up the number line, primes occur less frequently, and twin primes are rarer still. But the twin prime conjecture is that there are infinitely many twin primes. You never run out. As of right now, no one has proven this conjecture true or false. But the crazy thing is this: we may never know. Because what has been proven is that in any system of mathematics where you can do basic arithmetic, there will always be true statements that are impossible to prove. That is life. Specifically, this is the game of life created in 1970 by mathematician John Conway. Sadly, he passed away in 2020 from COVID-19. Conway's game of life is played on an infinite grid of square cells, each of which is either live or dead. And there are only two rules. One, any dead cell with exactly 3 neighbors comes to life. And 2, any living cell with less than 2 or more than 3 neighbors dies. Once you set up the initial arrangement of cells, the 2 rules are applied to the next generation. One after that, one after that, and so on. It's totally automatic. Conway called it a zero-player game. But even though the rules are simple, the game itself can generate a wide variety of behavior. Some patterns are stable once they arise, they never change. Others oscillate back and forth. A few can travel across the grid forever, like this glider. Many habits just fizzle out. But a few keep growing forever. They keep generating new cells. Now you think that given the simple rules of the game, you could just look at any pattern and determine what will happen to it. Will it eventually reach a steady state? Or will it keep growing without limit? But it turns out, this question is impossible to answer. The ultimate fate of a pattern in Conway's game of life is undecidable. Meaning, there is no possible algorithm that is guaranteed to answer the question, what it means. You could always just try running the pattern and see what happens. Rules of the game are a kind of algorithm after all. But that's not guaranteed to give you an answer either. Because even if you run it for a million generations, you won't be able to say whether it'll last forever or just 2 million generations, or a billion, or a Google plus. Is there something special about the game of life that makes it undecidable? No. There are actually a huge number of systems that are undecidable. Brain tiles, quantum physics, airline ticketing systems, and even Magic the Gathering. To understand how undecidability shows up in all of these places, we have to go back 150 years to a full-blown revolt in mathematics. In 1874, Georg Cantor, a German mathematician, published a paper that launched a new branch of mathematics called set theory. A set is just a well-defined collection of things. So the 2 shoes on your feet are a set, as are all the planetariums in the world. There's a set with nothing in it, the empty set, and a set with everything in it. Now Cantor was thinking about sets of numbers, like natural numbers, positive integers like 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, and real numbers, which include fractions like a third, 5 halves, and also irrational numbers like pi, e in the square root of 2. Basically, any number that can be represented as an infinite decimal. And he wondered, are there more natural numbers? Or more real numbers between 0 and 1? The answer might seem obvious. There are an infinite number of each, so both sets should be the same size. called manifestation. It shows there must be more real numbers between 0 and 1 than there are natural numbers existing out there. So not all infinities are the same size. Hence, call these countable and uncountable infinities respectively. In fact, there are even more uncountable infinities which are larger. The Cantor's work was circulated throughout mathematics for 2,000 years, including algebra, and physics. But at the turn of the 19th century, Lobachevsky and Gauss discovered non-Euclidean numbers. And this prompted mathematicians to examine more closely the foundation of their field. They did not like what they saw. The idea of a limit is hard to calculate, but easily defined. Now, Cantor was showing that infinity itself is much more complex than anyone had imagined. In all this upheaval, mathematics practically continued to make programs among mathematicians of the engineering country. On the one side were the intuitionists who thought that Cantor's work was nonsense. They were convinced that math was a pure creation of the human mind, and that infinities like Cantor's weren't real. Henri Poincaré said that later generations will regard set theory as a disease from which one has recovered. Leopold Kronecker called Cantor a scientific charlatan and a corrupter of the youth, and he worked to keep Cantor from getting a job he wanted. On the other side were the formalists. They thought that math could be put on absolutely secure logical foundations through Cantor's set theory. The informal leader of the formalists was the German mathematician David Hilbert. Hilbert was a living legend, a hugely influential mathematician who had worked in nearly every area of mathematics. He almost beat Einstein to the punch on general relativity. He developed entirely new mathematical concepts that were crucial for quantum mechanics, and he knew that Cantor's work was brilliant. Hilbert was convinced that a more formal and rigorous system of mathematical proof based on set theory would solve all the issues that had cropped up in math over the last century. And most other mathematicians agreed with him. No one shall expel us from the paradise that Cantor has created, Hilbert declared. But in 1901, Bertrand Russell pointed out a serious problem in Cantor's set theory. Russell knew that if sets can contain anything, they can contain other sets, or even themselves. For example, the set of all sets must contain itself, as does the set of sets with more than 5 elements. We can even talk about the set of all sets that contain themselves. But this leads straight to a problem. What about R, the set of all sets that don't contain themselves? If R doesn't contain itself, well, then it must contain itself. But if R does contain itself, then by definition, it must not contain itself. So R contains itself if and only if it doesn't. Russell had found another paradox of self-reference. He later explained the paradox using a hairy analogy. Let's say there's a village populated entirely by grown men with a trained law. Basically, the law states that the village barber must shave all those in the village who do not shave themselves. But the barber himself lives in the village too. He's a man, so he shaves him. If he doesn't shave himself, then the barber has to shave him. But the barber can't shave himself, because the barber doesn't shave anyone who shaves himself. So the barber must shave himself if and only if he doesn't shave himself. This is a contradiction.
And I see on the inside, you are as something that relevant in the middle
Russell's paradox, thinking it had proven set theory hopelessly flawed. But Zermelo and other mathematicians solved the problem by restricting the concept of for example, the concept of there is a bunch of all sets which don't contain themselves. This is the paradoxes that come with self-reference. Hilbert and the formalists lived to fight another day, but self-reference refused to die quite that easily. Fast forward to the 1960s, mathematician Hao Wang was looking at square tiles with different colors on each side, like these. The rules were that touching edges must be the same color. You can't rotate or reflect tiles, only slide them around. The question was, if you're given an arbitrary set of these tiles, can you tell if they will tile the planes? That is, will they connect up with no gaps?
No points at all. And even though I played the game, I get nothing.
Whether they will tile the plane or not. The problem is undecidable, just like the fate of a pattern in Conway's Game of Life. In fact, it is exactly the same problem, and that problem ultimately comes from self-reference, as Hilbert and the formalists were about to discover. Hilbert wanted to secure the foundations of mathematics by developing a new system for mathematical proofs. Systems of proof were an old idea going back to the ancient Greeks. A system of proof starts with axioms, basic statements that are assumed to be true, like a straight line can be drawn between any two points. Proofs are then constructed from those axioms using rules of inference, methods for using existing statements to derive new statements. These are chosen to preserve truth. If the existing statements are true, then so are the new ones. Hilbert wanted a formal system of proof, a symbolic, logical language with a rigid set of manipulation rules for those symbols. Logical and mathematical statements could then be translated into this system. If you drop a book, then it will fall would be A then B. And no human is immortal would be expressed like this. Hilbert and the formalists wanted to express the axioms of mathematics as symbolic statements in a formal system, and set up the rules of inference as the system's rules for symbol manipulation. So Russell, along with Alfred North Whitehead, developed a formal system like this in their 3-volume Principia Mathematica, published in 1913. Principia Mathematica is vast, a total of nearly 2,000 pages of dense mathematical notation. It takes 762 pages just to get to a complete proof that 1 plus 1 equals 2. At which point Russell and Whitehead dryly note, above proposition is occasionally useful. The authors had originally planned a 4th volume, but unsurprisingly, they were too worn out to complete it. So yes, the notation is dense and exhausting, but it is also exact, unlike ordinary language. It leaves no room for errors or fuzzy logic to begin. And most importantly, it allows you to prove properties of the formal system itself. There were 3 big questions that Hilbert wanted answered about mathematics. Number 1, is math complete? Meaning, is there a way to prove every true statement? Does every true statement have a proof? Number 2, is mathematics consistent? Meaning, is it free of contradictions? I mean, if you can simultaneously prove A and not A, then that's a real problem. You can prove anything at all. And number 3, is math decidable? Meaning, is there an algorithm that can always determine whether a statement follows from the answer? Now, Hilbert can answer all 3 of these questions on his. At a major conference in 1930, Hilbert gave a fiery speech at the court. He ended it with a line that summed up his formal view. In opposition to English ignorability, our slogan shall be, must be, will. These words are literally on the fringe. By the time Hilbert gave this speech, he was already published. Just the day before, at a small meeting in the office, 24-year-old physician named Bertha Murray, when he had found the answer to the first of Hilbert's stupid questions about the answer was no. A complete formal system of mathematics was impossible. The only person who gave much attention was John Neumann, one of Hilbert's former students, who pulled Gödel aside and asked him a question. But the next year, Gödel published a paper here, and this time, everyone, including Hilbert, this is how Gödel's proof works. Gödel wanted to use logic, mathematics, to answer questions about the very system of logic. And so he took all these basic symbols of a mathematical system, and then he gave each one a number. This is known as the symbols Gödel numbers. So, symbol number 0, symbol number 1, expressing all of these symbols as numbers, then what do you do about the numbers themselves? Well, 0 gets some sort of number 6, and if you want to write a 1, you just put this successor symbol next to it. The successor of 0 is 1. If you want to write 2, you have to write SS0. That represents 2, and so on. So you can represent any positive integer this way. Granted, it is cumbersome, but it works, and that is the point of this system. So now that we have Gödel numbers for all of the basic symbols and all of the numbers we might want to use, we can start to write equations. Like we could write 0 equals 0. So these symbols have the Gödel numbers 6, 5, 6. And we can actually create a new card that represents this equation, 0 equals 0. And the way we do it is we take the prime numbers, so I get 2, and we raise each one to the power of the Gödel number of the symbol in our equation. So we have 2 to the power of 6 times 3 to the power of 5 times 5 to the power of 6 equals 243 million. So 243 million is the Gödel number of the full equation 0 equals 0. You can write down Gödel numbers for any set of symbols that you can imagine. So really, this is an infinite deck of cards, where any set of symbols that you want to write down in a sequence, you can represent with a unique Gödel number. And the beauty of this Gödel number is you can do a prime factorization of it, and you can work out exactly what symbols made up this card. So in this whole pack of cards, there are going to be true statements and there are going to be false statements. So how do you prove that something is true? Well, you need to go to the axioms. The axioms also have their own Gödel numbers, which are formed in a way. So here's an axiom which says not the successor of any number x equals 0. Which makes sense, because in this system there are no negative numbers. So the successor of any number is not 0. So we can put down this axiom, then we can substitute in 0 for x, saying that 1 does not equal 0, and we've created a proof. This is the simplest proof I can think of that shows that 1 does not equal 0. Now this card, for the proof of 1 does not equal 0, gets its own Gödel number. The way we calculate this Gödel number is just as before, we take the prime numbers. We raise 2 to the power of the axiom times 3 to the power of 1 does not equal 0. And we get a tremendously large number. It would have 73 million digits if you calculated it all out. So I've just left it here in exponential notation. As you can see, these numbers get very large. So you might want to start just calling them by letters. So we can say this one is Gödel number A, so, Gödel goes to all this trouble to find this card. It says there is no proof for the statement Gödel number. The trick is, the Gödel number of this card is G. So what the statement is really saying is this card is unprovable. There is no proof anywhere in our infinite deck for this card. Now think about it. If it's false and there is a proof, then what you have just proven is there is no proof. So you're stuck with a contradiction. That would mean the mathematical system is inconsistent. The other alternative is that this card is true. There is no proof for the statement with Gödel number G. That means this mathematical system has true statements in it that have no proof. So your mathematical system is incomplete. And that is Gödel's incompleteness theorem. This is how he shows that any basic mathematical system that can do fundamental arithmetic will always have statements within it which are true, but which have no proof. There's a line in the TV show The Office that echoes the self-referential paradox of Gödel's proof.
Jim is my enemy. That's true. Now, Jim is also his own worst enemy. The enemy of my enemy, my friend.
be true statements about mathematics that just cannot be proved. Now, Gilbert could console himself and hope that at least we could still prove math's consistent, that is, free of contradictions. But then Gödel published his second inconsistency theorem, in which he showed that any consistent formal system of math cannot prove its own consistency. So, taken together, Gödel's two incompleteness theorems say that the best we can hope for is a consistent yet incomplete system of math. But a system like that cannot prove its own consistency. So, some contradictions will crop up in the future, revealing that the system we've been working with has been inconsistent the whole time. And that leaves only the third and final big question of whether is mathematics decided? That is there an algorithm that can always determine whether a statement falls from the answer? And in 1936, Alan Turing found a way to settle this question. But to do it, he had to invent the modern computer. In his time, computers weren't machines. They were people. Often women carried out long, tedious calculations. Turing imagined an entirely mechanical computer. He wanted it to be powerful enough to perform any computation imaginable, but simple enough that you could reason through its operation. So he came up with a machine overwrite any value, left, right, or simply halt. The program consists of a set of internal instructions based on you could imagine exporting these instructions to any other program exactly the same way first. Although this sounds simple, a Turing machine's arbitrarily large memory and program aimed at execute any computable algorithm if given enough time.
Good morning.
Addition and subtraction to the entire YouTube algorithm. You can do anything a modern computer can. That's what made the Turing machine so useful in answering Gilbert's question on decidability. When a Turing machine halts, the program is finished running and the tape is the output. But sometimes a Turing machine never halts. Maybe it gets stuck in an infinite loop. Is it possible to tell beforehand if a program will halt or not on a particular input? Turing realized this halting problem was very similar to the decidability problem. If you could find a way to figure out if a Turing machine would halt, then it would also be possible to decide if a statement followed from the axioms. For example, you can solve the twin prime conjecture by writing a Turing machine program that starts with the axioms and constructs all theorems that can be produced in one step using the rules of inference. Then it constructs all theorems that can be produced in one step from those, and so on. Each time it generates a new theorem, it checks if it's a twin prime conjecture. And if it is, it halts. If not, it never halts.
Anything you need, let me know. We'll get it. We'll figure it out.
The twin prime conjecture and all sorts of other unsolved questions. So Turing said, let's assume we can make a machine H that can determine whether any Turing machine will halt or not on a particular input. You insert the program into this input, and H simulates what will happen, printing out either halts or never halts. For now, we don't worry about how H works. We just know that it always works. It always gives you the right answer. Now, we can modify the H machine by adding additional components. One, if it receives the output halt, it goes into a infinite loop. Another, if it receives never halts, then it immediately halts. We can call this entire new machine H1. And first contact program for that entire machine. Now, what about it? If the machine well, now, simulating what each plus would do, essentially, each has to determine the behavior on the machine that it itself is a part of. We're losing people. This exact
Go forward, dude. Go forward. Yeah, he couldn't do much.
Now remember that Turing designed the machines to be as powerful computers as it is possible to be. To this day, fast computational systems are those that do everything that Turing machines do. This is called Turing. It turns out there are many such Turing systems. Although they are powerful, every Turing complete system comes with a catch, its own analog of the multiple, some undecidable property of the system. When files are Turing complete, their only problem is whether or not they'll travel linearly. Complex quantum systems are Turing complete, and their multi-problem is the spectrogram question. In a game of life, is Turing complete? Its multi-problem is literally whether or not it holds. There are many more examples of this. They're like computing systems, magic, gathering, PowerPoint slides, Excel spreadsheets. Nearly every programming language in existence is designed to be Turing complete. But in theory, we only need one programming language because we can program anything at all using any Turing complete system. So here's a Turing machine inside a game of life. this realization of the third mathematicians had led to the disintegration of the entire mathematical history. But instead, thinking about this problem transformed the concept of infinity, changed the course of a world war, and led directly to the invention of the device that watching us on right now. Hey, this video was sponsored by Brilliant, a website full of interactive courses and quizzes that delve deep into topics like math, physics, and computer science. If you've gotten this far into this video, you're likely someone who did love Brilliant. I've been going through their logic course, and it's really got me thinking. The problems start out easy, but get more and more challenging as you develop your understanding. And that's what I love about this stuff. I love how it guides you, not by telling you exactly, but by exposing you to increasingly sophisticated puzzles. And at the end, I feel like I've worked it out for myself, which essentially I have, through their carefully curated selection of problems, and with helpful hints and explanations for when I get stuck. Now, there were a lot of things I wanted to include in this video, but couldn't because it's already over half an hour long. So if you want to explore these ideas further, I'd highly recommend their courses on number theory and computer science fundamentals. For viewers of this channel, we are offering 20% off an annual subscription for the first 200 people to sign up. Just go to brilliant.org/Veritasium, and we'll put that link down in the description. So I want to thank Brilliant for sponsoring Veritasium, and I want to thank you for watching.
I'm Louise, and this is my doctor for you. I get a Big Mac, chicken nuggets, fries, and a Sprite. Either sour or barbecue sauce. Let's do it now. Where the hell let me get this back?
This is the most dangerous problem in mathematics, one that young mathematicians are warned not to waste their time on. It's the simple conjecture that not even the world's best mathematicians have been able to solve. Paul Erdős, a famous mathematician, said, "Mathematics is not yet ripe enough for such questions." Here's how it works. Pick a number, any number. 7? Good choice. Okay, we're going to apply two rules. If the number is odd, we multiply by 3 and add 1. 3 times 7 is 21, plus 1 is 22. If the number is even, we divide by 2. So 22 divided by 2 is 11. Now we keep applying these two rules. 11 is odd, so we multiply by 3, 33, and add 1, 34. Even, divide by 2, 17. Odd. Multiply by 3, 51, add 1, 52. Even, divide by 2, 26. Still even. Divide by 2, 13. Odd. So we multiply by 3, 39, add 1, and that's 40. Even, so we divide by 2, divide by 2, and divide by 2, 5. Odd. Multiply by 3, 15, add 1, 16. Divide by 2, that's 8, and then 4, 2, and 1. Now 1 is odd, so we multiply by 3 and add 1, which equals 4. But 4 goes to 2, goes to 1, so we're in a loop. The lowest number is 1. Now the conjecture is this. Every positive integer, if you apply these rules, will eventually end up in the 4, 2, 1 loop. This is commonly called the Collatz conjecture, after German mathematician Lothar Collatz, who may have come up with it in the 1930s. But the problem has many origin stories and many names. It's also known as the Ulam conjecture, Kakutani's problem, Waite's conjecture, Pass's algorithm, the Syracuse problem, and simply 3n plus 1. Why is 3x plus 1 so famous?
Among professional mathematicians, maybe it's not famous but infamous, in the sense that if someone actually admits in public that they're working on it, then there's something wrong with it.
The numbers you get by applying 3x plus 1 are called hailstone numbers, because they go up and down like hailstones in a thundercloud, but eventually they all fall down to 1, or at least we think they do. You can think of the numbers as representing the height above the ground in meters. So a number like 26 would start 26 meters above the ground. And if you apply 3x plus 1, it rises up as high as 40 meters, and in total it takes 10 steps to get to 1. So 10 is called its total stopping time. But take the very next number, 27, and it bounces around all over the place.
fact, it climbs all the way up to 9,232. As an altitude, that is higher than Mount Everest. Before it too falls back to the ground. In total, it takes 111 steps for 27 to get down to 1 and end up before 2-1 blue. The path that different numbers take varies so widely, even numbers right next to each other. So how do you even start to make progress on this problem? Well, honestly, mathematicians struggled. People just decided this was something invented by the Soviets to slow down U.S. science, and it was doing a good job at it because everybody's sitting there twiddling their thumbs and making no progress on this trivial thing that you can tell school children. Jeffrey Ligarius is the world authority on 3x plus 1. The first time I met him, I was a senior in college, and he pulled me aside and he said, "Don't do this. Don't work on this problem. If you want to have a career, do not start spending time writing about this or publishing any papers about this. Do real math for a while to establish yourself." Alex Kontorovich didn't listen. He and Yakov Sinai looked at the paths of the hailstone numbers. Were there any patterns? Well, obviously all of them end up in 1, but what about the paths they take to get there? The pattern is randomness. Here is the sequence of a large number chosen at random. The graph peaks and then drops so low that you can't really see what's happening at this scale. But if you take the logarithm, you find this wiggly graph with a downward trend. It looks kind of like the stock market on a bad day. And this is no coincidence. Both are examples of geometric Brownian motion. That means if you take the log and remove the linear trend, fluctuations are random. Like flipping a coin each step. If the coin is heads, the line goes up. Tails, it goes down. 3x plus 1 is just like the random wiggles of the stock market. Over long enough periods, the stock market tends to trend upwards, while 3x plus 1 trends down. Another way to analyze 3x plus 1 is by looking at the leading digit of each number in a sequence. Here are the hailstone numbers starting with 3 as the seed. We can count up how many numbers start with a 1, how many start with a 2, how many start with a 3, and so on to make a sequence. You can do the same for the sequences that start with 4, the short one, and the sequences that start with 5, 6, and 7. Again, for each sequence, we're just counting up how many numbers start with each digit 1 through 9 and adding that to our histogram. If you keep doing this for more and more numbers, eventually the histogram settles into a stable pattern. For the first billion sequences, you'll find 1 is by far the most common leading digit. 30% of all numbers start with 1. Around 17.5% start with 2. 12% start with 3, and the frequency decreases for higher digits. Fewer than 5% of all the numbers start with 9. Now this pattern is not unique to 3x plus 1. It actually comes up everywhere. From the populations of countries, the value of companies, all the physical constants, and the Fibonacci numbers, just to name a few. The distribution is known as Benford's law, and it is even used to detect fraud. If all the numbers on your tax forms obey Benford's law, then, well, you're probably being honest. If not, you're going to be hiding something. In elections, Benford's law can be used to spot irregularities, so you have to apply it correctly. Benford's law works best when the numbers involved span several orders of magnitude, as they do for 3x plus 1. But Benford's law can't tell us whether all numbers will end up in the order we want or not. For that, we need a different source of analysis. At first glance, it seems strange that we apply 3x plus 1, all numbers should end up in 1. Consider that there are the same number of odd and even numbers, but odd numbers are more than tripled, while even numbers are only cut in half. Therefore, it seems like every sequence on average should grow, not shrink. But here's the catch. Every time you multiply an odd number by 3 and then add 1, it will always become an even number. And that means the next step is to divide by 2. So odd numbers are not actually tripled by 3x plus 1, they're increased by a factor of about 3 over 2. I'm neglecting the plus 1 because it's insignificant for large numbers. And 3 halves is actually the most odd number can grow in one step. Think of the path from one odd number in a sequence to the next odd number. After multiplying by 3 and adding 1, you have an even number. And 50% of the time, dividing by 2 brings you back to an odd number. But a quarter of the time, you can divide by 4 before you get to the next odd number. So for a quarter of numbers, the next one will be 3/4 of its initial value. An eighth of the time, you can divide by 8 before getting to the next odd number. And a 16th of the time, you can divide by 16, and so on. If you take the geometric mean, you find, on average, you get from one odd number to the next one, you multiply by 3/4, which is less than 1. So statistically speaking, 3x plus 1 sequences are more likely to shrink than grow. Take 341, for example. Multiply by 3 and add 1, you get 1024, which you can divide by 2, and then divide by 2 again, and again, and again, and again, 10 times in total until you're down to 1. One way to visualize these paths of numbers to 3x plus 1 is simply to show how each number connects to the next one in its sequence. This is called a directed graph. It looks like a tree or a series of little streams that flow into each other. If the conjecture is true, it means that every single number is connected to this graph. Every tiny stream, all the way up to infinity, eventually flows into the massive river of 4, 2, 1. Some mathematicians have modified this visualization by rotating the graph at each number, anti-clockwise if it's an odd number, and clockwise if it's even. And then you end up with a structure that looks like a coral or seaweed. By adjusting the degree of rotation for odd and even numbers, you can create these beautiful, organic-looking shapes. Now, there are two ways the conjecture could be false. There could be a number somewhere, some seed, that starts a sequence of numbers that grows to infinity. For whatever reason, it doesn't obey the same numerical gravity as all of the other numbers. Another possibility is there exists a sequence of numbers that forms a closed loop. All the numbers in this loop would be unconnected to the main graph. But thus far, no loop or sequence that shoots off to infinity has been found. And not for lack of trying, mathematicians have tested by brute force every single number up to 2 to the 68. That's 295 quintillion, 147 quadrillion, 905 trillion, 179 billion, 352 million, 825,856 numbers. We know for certain that every single one of those numbers eventually comes back down to 1. We have tested nearly 300 quintillion numbers, and none of them disproves the conjecture. In fact, given this information, mathematicians calculate that any loop other than 421 must be at least 186 billion numbers long. So it seems pretty likely that the conjecture is true, but this doesn't prove it. One way mathematicians have attempted to prove it is by making a scatter plot with all the seed numbers on the x-axis and a number from each seed sequence on the y-axis. Now, if you could show that in every 3x plus 1 sequence, there is a number that is smaller than the original seed, well, then you have proven the CrossOut's conjecture. Because whatever number you pick, you know it will at some point get smaller. And that smaller number, as a seed, also gets smaller, and so on down to 1. Meaning the only way any sequence can end is in the 4, 2, 1 loop. This has not yet been shown. But in 1976, Terra was able to show that almost all CrossOut sequences reach a point below their initial value. In 1979, this limit was reduced with almost all numbers going to less than x to the power of 0.869. And then in 1994, it was further lowered to less than x to the power of 0.7925. In this case, the term almost all numbers has a technical mathematical definition. It means that as the numbers you're looking at go to infinity, the fraction that end up under the curve goes to 1. Then, in 2019, one of the world's greatest living mathematicians, Terry Tao, was able to show 3x plus 1 obeys even stricter criteria. He showed almost all numbers will end up smaller than any arbitrary function f of x, so long as that function goes to infinity as x goes to infinity. The function can rise as slowly as you like. So log x is an example, or log x works too, or log x. What this means is for almost all numbers, you can guarantee that there is an arbitrarily small number somewhere in sequence. In a public talk he gave in 2020, Terry Howe said, "This is about as close as one can get to the Collatz conjecture without actually solving it." This is an impressive result, but it's still not a proof. So why can't we prove the conjecture true? Could it be because it's not true? I mean, everyone is trying to prove it true. Almost no one is looking for a counterexample.
It happened to me just 2 years ago, where there was something I was trying to prove that I was trying for 3 years to prove, and I couldn't get it to work. And then I found a counterexample, and then I realized what the correct statement should have been. And then a month later, I proved the correct statement. Maybe we should be spending more energy looking for counterexamples.
Remember how the number 27 grows all the way to 9,232? Here is a plot of seed numbers up to 10,000, with the largest number reached for each seed plotted on the y-axis. The y-axis stops at 100,000, but not all numbers can be shown at this scale. The seed 9,663, for example, climbs as high as 27 million. And as yet, no one has proven why a number couldn't just shoot off to infinity. And it would take only one to disprove the conjecture. Or some set of numbers to be part of a loop, not connected to the main graph. As far as we know, there is only one loop for each one. But something strange happens if you include negative numbers. Applying the same 3x plus 1 rules as before, there's not one, not two loops, but 3 infinite loops of numbers. And they start at low values like minus 17, minus 5. Why should there be disconnected loops on the negative side of the number line, but not on the positive side? Now, one of the most convincing pieces of evidence for this is Terry Howe's proof that almost all numbers have a number in their sequence that is arbitrarily small. But proving that almost all numbers obey this criteria isn't the same thing as proving that all numbers do. How many numbers between 1 and 100 are perfect squares? The answer is 10. So 10% of numbers up to 100 are perfect squares. How many numbers between 1 and 1,000 are perfect squares? The answer is 31. So only 3.1% of the numbers up to 1,000 are perfect squares. And the higher you go, the smaller this percentage becomes. Such that in the limit, you could say almost all numbers are not perfect squares. The fraction of numbers that are not perfect squares goes to 1 as x goes to infinity. And yet we know there are an infinite number of perfect squares, and we know exactly where they are. Now we've tested by brute force all numbers up to 2 to the 68, and they all obey the Collatz conjecture. You might be thinking that we should have found a counterexample by this point. But on the scale of all numbers, 2 to the 68 is nothing. I mean, the Polya conjecture, proposed in 1919 by George Polya, asserted that the majority of natural numbers up to any given number have an